What's up, Thrashers, and welcome back. It's been a few weeks since I've done this, but it's time for another episode of Thrash Reviews, where yours truly, Thrash Maniac 99, continues to review upcoming hard rock and heavy metal albums in the calendar year of 2016, and we have finally arrived to probably the most anticipated album of the year and one of the most anticipated albums of the decade. Metallica's Hardwired to Self Destruct double album. Do I really have to do a little history lesson? I guess I might as well because it's kind of my shtick, but for those of you who have been living under a rock, Metallica is a heavy metal slash thrash metal band that formed back in 1981 and have become one of the pioneering bands of the thrash metal genre, with classic records such as Kill 'Em All, Ride the Lightning, Master of Puppets, and a slightly more progressive type of album with And Justice for All. And then they began a big career turning point in 1991 with the release of their self-titled album, sometimes called the Black Album because of the black cover, where they moved into a more traditional heavy metal centered sound, and it was an excellent album and their most successful album to date. Then what followed was two albums in 96 and 97 that had more of that blues influence into their heavy metal sound, Load and Reload. And then they did an excellent covers double album with Garage Inc., or Garage Incorporated. Then they went on to Saint Anger, which is one of the most infamous albums in metal. While initially the album was meh, it has aged well in the last, 13 years because there is a lot worse shit out there than Saint Anger. 2008, they released Death Magnetic, and it was a really excellent album. Despite a couple weak tracks, it was still a fantastic return to form, so to speak. While some people out there still think it was somewhat mediocre, I think it was above par. But now we get to 8 years later. It's Hardwired to Self Destruct, the first first double studio album in Metallica history. This is their 10th album, clocking in at nearly 78 minutes long. This ain't the longest album by Metallica, which is a surprise, since it's a double album, 2 discs worth of music, 6 tracks on each. So let's explore what my favorite band of all time and one of the all-time best, or one of the most important heavy metal bands of all time, had in store for the double album. So we kicked off disc number 1 with the title track, Hardwired, the shortest song of the album at just a little over 3 minutes, which is something they haven't done since Kill 'Em All, when they had the song Motor Breath at like 3 minutes 4 seconds. This is 3 minutes 11 seconds. But with this song was an absolute thrashter piece. It was the first single of the album that they released back in August, and from the positive reception that the song got, people were pumped thanks to this song to look forward to this album. And this song just is unreal. Sometimes I tongue twist myself too much. The song is so unrelenting, it's almost as if, like the old metaphor I love to use, it's like your head is like a punching speed bag, and you're just taking the punches left and right, and you're just getting knocked around, but it's in a good way. The guitars were excellent. James Hetfield's voice just went absolutely full tilt. The guitar solo was really well done. But let's move on to the next track, Atlas Rise, the third single from the album, and one of my favorite singles that they put out. This song kind of showcases their influences from the new wave of British heavy metal, particularly bands like Iron Maiden, Diamond Head, Saxon, and so on and so forth. Particularly Iron Maiden. Excellent riffs. This is the big thing with this album, is mostly a riff-oriented album, but there is a lot of guitar solos. But some of the band's best riffs have come on this album. Some of the best that they've written in a long time. Atlas Rise, continuing on the ever-loving success of the singles of this album. We move on to the next track, which is the second single, Moth in the Flame. One of the most melodic songs of the album, kind of like they were taking a page out of the playbook of modern melodic death metal bands with how they're performing guitar melodies and guitar harmonies, and they kind of brought that into the fold. Then again, Metallica had done this kind of stuff before the melodic death metal movement happened, but it's like almost like as if they went back to the past as well as look at some of the modern bands and see how they did the guitar harmonies and melodies, and they did an excellent job. Plus, Hetfield's voice was very melodic during a good portion of the song. Can't go wrong with it. Now we move on to the final track of disc number 1, Halo on Fire, the longest song of the album at a little over 8 minutes. Arguably the most progressive song on the album, arguably, because there are certain parts that aren't fitting into a traditional song structure. In the beginning, it kind of sounds like they're going for an anthem, but they take a swing in the right field and just absolutely kind of get the listeners really interested in the song when it transitions from the heavy into like a more dark guitar sound with a great vocal performance by Hetfield. I think this is maybe Hetfield's best vocal performance on the album, and this is the song, honestly, from this album I've listened to the most because it's just catchy, but it's dark, and lyrically, as well as a lot of songs on the album dealing with the concept of overthrowing abuse of power and the common theme I've seemed to have come across with a couple albums this year, particularly in Avenged Sevenfold's The Stage, where it deals with the whole problems with society and so on and so forth in today's world. Very common theme I've noticed this year, and I guess it makes sense considering where we are right now. But anyways, Halo on Fire to me was a big highlight of this album. And it kind of sounds like almost like they went back to the Black Album a little bit, and a tiny bit in the Load with particularly songs like Until It Sleeps and Hero of the Day, but kind of made it more heavy and more modern. And what a way to close out disc number 1. Disc number 2 opens with the song Confusion, and right on the beginning riff and drum pattern, you can definitely hear they definitely were taking influence from Diamond Head's song Am I Evil, but made it into their own style of a riffing pattern, drum pattern. The guitars on this song was awesome. The vocals were excellent. That's really what I gotta say about that. Then we move on to the closing song of disc number 2, Spit Out the Bone, another thrash tune that was just absolutely unrelenting in its own right. The longest of the thrash style of songwriting. Wow, over 7 minutes, and it's almost like they definitely looked back in the past and tried to think, okay, what made us one of the biggest bands ever and of all time? And they kind of took those tricks, put it into this song, and kind of made it almost proggy at times, but it's mostly a more simplistic song structure. But it was the guitar sounded very complex throughout. Plus the riffs on this song was very catchy and well written. And what a way to close out this album. So now we go to the scores, but before that, little overview. Going into this album, hearing a couple of reviews from Cover Killer Nation and Sam Dunn from Banger Films, and it was kind of mixed. Banger kind of gave it a slightly average rating, whereas Cover Killer Nation gave it a decent rating. But there are other people saying, like, this is some of their best work since the Black Album. Even though, like I said, Death Magnetic is not a slouch of an album, but I do think this album blows Death Magnetic out of the water, in my opinion. The only weak point that got me worried was the song Man Unkind, where the beginning was excellent with that cool bass line, But then it just kind of got a little redundant within that song. And they tried to do the progressive thing in a big way on that track. But the weak point of the album was this song because of the time signature shifts, because of Lars's drumming during those portions kind of sounded a little out of place. And that's not a jab at Lars. I think Lars is an awesome drummer. There, I said it. Go ahead and hate me if you want, but I love Lars's drumming. But this was the weak point of the album, but it's a very minor complaint, if any. Top to bottom, aside from Man Unkind, well, it wasn't a bad song. It was just a decent track, but everything else is worth listening to. If you're feeling very skeptical about this album based on what other people have said, I mean, it's good to kind of get insight from other people, but it's all about your opinion and your point of view. Just like how I'm doing with this review. I think this is, in my opinion, of the big four bands who have released records in the last 12 to 14 months, going back to September with Slayer Repentless. Then we had in January Megadeth Dystopia. Then we had in around February, March, we had the new Anthrax album. And that was a really excellent release. But then we get to this. If you ask me, this is the strongest of the big four albums to have been released in the last year. I know there are going to be people out there saying I'm biased. Maybe a little bit, but I am also being very impartial. Now, when you look at this and compare it to these three critiques, does it hold up to their older records? No. But it doesn't have to. Does it hold up against certain modern bands, say like Avenged Sevenfold, Gojira, Lamb of God? Maybe. Just maybe. Does it hold up to recently released albums from classic metal bands like Motorhead, Black Sabbath, Iron Maiden, Judas Priest? Absolutely it does. And like I said, it even holds up against the rest of the big four. And if you ask me, this is better than those other three albums. I loved the Anthrax album. I really liked Megadeth. Didn't care too much for Slayer. But this is the strongest of the big four albums, in my opinion, to have come out in the last year. 90 out of 100. Despite the 1 weak track of Man Unkind, this was an excellent double album. Riff after riff, solo after solo. But the star of the album was James Hetfield. He has his voice back, and he's in his early 50s. And he sounded on this album similar to how he sounded back in the 90s, to an extent. Despite his voice has aged, he has shown that he is still capable of belting out awesome vocals and having that charisma to him. 90 out of 100. Awesome double album. Highly recommended for anybody who's a fan of thrash, of traditional metal, fans of Metallica, or even new fans who are interested in wanting to check out this band. This is not a bad place to start. Start with the new album, and then kind of do like a reverse time lapse and go back to the old stuff. But anyways, thank you guys for watching. Now that the last of the big albums is done, we still got one album left on my album schedule to check out of upcoming albums. That's Witchery next week. Once that's done, I'll be going back to old albums I didn't get to check out yet, like Devin Townsend, Epica, Periphery, Hail Spirit Noir, Riverside, Dark Tranquillity, Vader, and so on and so forth. To get those reviews out of the way, and then it'll be the top 50 album of the year lists, comprised of 5 parts, so that way it doesn't get too boring. But anyways, thank you guys for watching. Peace out, and have a good night. And also, I'm going to go back and listen to some more of this.